Fairmont Crest had long grown accustomed to glossy masks, carefully polished smiles, and parties where everyone pretended to be innocent of whatever was rotting underneath. But this time, the rot was no longer hidden in affairs, petty revenge, or personal cons. It lived inside a pipeline filthy enough to drag the powerless into its current, airtight enough to throw the police off the scent, and ruthless enough to turn human blood and flesh into merchandise. While every eye stayed fixed on intermediaries, disposable enforcers, and the drifting faces on the city's edge, no one truly believed the mind behind it all could be Leslie, the woman who always appeared as ambition incarnate, as competitive hunger given a body, as someone desperate to climb into a class that once refused to claim her. Her loudness became the perfect camouflage. People could easily imagine Leslie wrecking a marriage, laying a trap for a rival, or threatening someone with low, ugly tricks. They struggled to imagine she could be cold enough to orchestrate an underground network, disciplined enough to erase every trace, and patient enough to wait for months until the snare tightened around the people she wanted to control. Leslie built her position using the same principle she had lived by for as long as she could remember. Never let anyone see all of you at once. To one person, she was a victim who had been sneered at and was only demanding fairness. To another, she was a struggling mother, bitter, sharp-edged, yet still clinging to Eva as the last proof her life had not become a complete failure. To the useful hands inside the ring, she was an invisible brain, present only through instructions, money, and fear. No one was allowed the full picture, because Leslie understood something simple and lethal. When the truth is shattered into too many pieces, when each person holds only a fragment, no one has the strength to assemble it. She never dirtied her hands with the ugliest links. She let people like Ren handle transport, let lower contacts approach those who needed money, those who were sick, those who were desperate. Leslie kept the rights that mattered: the right to command, to sever ties, to burn evidence, to punish. The less she appeared, the stronger she became. The more she let others believe she was merely addicted to arguments and romantic schemes, the more space she gained to manage something far more dangerous. That confidence gradually turned into a poison that sank deep into Leslie's bones. She began to believe she had beaten fate completely, that years of hiding behind false names, of slipping through cracks, of living as someone despised had taught her more than anyone in Fairmont Crest could ever imagine. And she didn't want money from the plasma ring alone. Money had never been her only destination. She wanted something sweeter than wealth, the sensation of standing over the people who once looked down on her. The thrill of knowing she could commit the most grotesque acts and still walk among them in expensive clothes with a calm face. She used the network to secure resources, to buy loyalty, to tighten a noose around anyone who needed silencing, to keep secrets in her hands that could destroy lives at a moment's notice. It was a war for power disguised as survival. And once Leslie tasted that kind of power, she lost the clarity to stop. She grew more reckless, more aggressive, and, most dangerously, she began to underestimate the possibility of being found. While Leslie believed she held the advantage, Jacob was pushed deeper and deeper into the case. What began as an undercover assignment slowly became an ongoing erosion of his private life. Each time he moved closer to a new link, another distance opened between him and Naomi, between him and the bare minimum peace he once believed he could still protect. He was forced to accept the shadows inside himself, forced to pretend indifference to the suffering of those being exploited just to avoid exposing his cover. Forced to walk like a man capable of compromising with evil while his heart filled with cracks. Jacob's anger stopped being a sudden flare. It hardened into a compressed weight in his chest, formed from helplessness as he watched victims drained of hope, from disgust at how the ring turned desperation into profit, and from the sharp awareness that the person behind it was smarter than anything they had predicted. What enraged Jacob most wasn't only the scope of the crime, but the feeling that the puppet master, more precisely, that she was laughing in their faces, living comfortably in the light while pushing others into the mud. Smitty was no longer standing on the sidelines as a simple supporter, either. The deeper he dug, the more he felt himself being dragged into a spiral with no exit. What he pieced together from June, from street sources, from transaction chains that seemed unrelated at first began to form a horrifying outline. Everything was being run by a mind that wasn't merely calculating, but intimately fluent in human psychology. This person knew who was greedy, who was frightened, who could be manipulated, who would stay silent to stay alive. Each time Smitty thought he had reached a breakthrough, a lead vanished, a witness changed their story, a piece of evidence was wiped clean before it could be formalized. That sense of being mocked didn't just haunt him, it created a colder, sharper anger. He began to understand this wasn't the kind of case solved by raiding a warehouse and arresting a few foot soldiers. To end it, they had to drag the real architect into the open. But the closer they came, the clearer the cost became. He watched Jacob being worn down, saw Naomi collapsing under fear, saw how easily innocent people could become the next price paid. And in that sleepless, razor-tight state, the name Leslie stopped sounding like a crazy theory. Izaiah entered the center of the storm in a way no one expected. In Eva's eyes, he was one of the rare spaces where she could believe her life might separate from her mother's darkness. His calmness, refinement, and patience seemed like a complete opposite of the chaos Leslie always carried, but that, too, was part of his cover. Izaiah did not come to Eva solely because feelings formed naturally, though over time, what he felt for her could no longer be reduced to a mission. At first, he approached her because of Leslie. Old data, lost traces, and past identity shifts suggested Leslie had existed under multiple skins, enough that certain people had tracked her long before the plasma ring drew attention. Izaiah was part of that surveillance line, placed in the right position at the right time, waiting for the moment Leslie would reveal a weakness. He didn't strike directly because he understood exactly what someone like Leslie would do. With an opponent like that, one missed blow wouldn't just send the target running, it would trigger a purge. Anyone suspected could disappear. Any evidence could evaporate overnight. To catch Leslie, they had to let her believe she was still winning. What pushed Izaiah from suspicion into certainty didn't come from a confession, but from a pattern of perfection. Leslie always reacted just enough. When Jacob approached a link, Leslie didn't panic like an innocent person, and she didn't overcorrect like someone already cornered. She simply shifted one step precisely enough to bend the investigation away. She gathered information faster than was reasonable. She knew what to erase and what to leave behind so no one would sense a guiding hand. More than that, while Fairmont Crest stayed consumed by fractures in marriages, revenge plays, and cracks between families, Leslie managed to turn every surrounding crisis into a curtain that shielded her operations. That smoothness wasn't luck. It was the signature of a mind accustomed to controlling a scene from the dark. Izaiah began noticing the smallest details around Eva, not to exploit her cruelly, but because he understood only the small. Ordinary things surrounding Eva could lead back to Leslie without triggering Leslie's alarm. Eva once complained her mother vanished at oddly specific times. Another time, she mentioned how Leslie became intensely hostile if anyone touched her private jewelry box. Then Eva casually brought up a ring Leslie rarely took off except when things grew tense, when Leslie would remove it and hide it as if she feared anyone looking too closely. From then on, the ring stopped being jewelry. It became a key. Izaiah realized Leslie didn't keep it only as a symbol of status, but as a central object inside her security system. With frightening patience, he began aligning the moments the ring disappeared from Leslie's hand with the waves of erased evidence, rewritten testimonies, and money moved through hidden channels. Each piece alone wasn't enough to indict her, but stacked together, they formed a consistent trajectory. What hurt him most was the moment he understood Eva was standing at the center of it all without knowing. She wasn't an accomplice, but she was the bridge that helped Leslie maintain her mask. As long as Eva kept believing her mother was only a distorted woman with some leftover love, Leslie would always have an emotional shield. And as long as Izaiah stayed beside Eva, he would eventually be forced to choose between protecting the mission and not shattering her heart. That conflict tore at Izaiah piece by piece. The more he saw Eva's fragility, the more he hated himself for the way he entered her life. He couldn't deny the original lie. Feelings that arrived later didn't erase where they came from. Every time Eva leaned on him to find a moment of peace from Leslie's dominance, he felt more contempt for himself. Yet the guilt didn't make him retreat, it made him more determined to end everything with finality. If Leslie escaped, Eva would remain a victim inside that control forever. If Leslie stayed standing, people would keep being pulled into games with no exit. Izaiah accepted that he might become a traitor in Eva's eyes if that was the cost of cutting off Leslie's power. It wasn't a noble decision. It was brutal, cold, and emotionally bloody, because he understood the moment the truth surfaced would be the moment Eva lost two things at once: her last illusion about her mother, and her last trust in the man standing beside her. Meanwhile, Leslie began making the greatest mistake of anyone who wins too often, believing no one was smart enough to keep pace with her. She noticed unusual movements around certain leads, but instead of withdrawing completely, she chose to tighten her grip. She squeezed the lower links, ordered the removal of anyone who might talk, pushed a few false trails into the open so Jacob and Smitty would chase them. Every step she took was logical, but the sheer number of steps created a pattern. Someone truly innocent would panic. Someone truly cautious would disappear. Leslie was furious, arrogant, and incapable of surrendering control. She couldn't tolerate the thought of someone closing in without knowing who. That rage made her begin punishing Eva whenever anything around her felt slightly out of place. She didn't strike or scream in a crude way, but used contempt, guilt, and manipulation to tighten a chokehold around her daughter. She made Eva feel perpetually lacking, perpetually indebted, perpetually obligated to stand with her mother or be branded a traitor. Every accusation Leslie threw wasn't only emotional weaponry, it was a way of keeping Eva close, keeping her within reach, keeping her as insurance against any threat that might arise from the daughter Leslie believed she understood best. Eva was crushed between two opposing poles. On one side was the resentment she'd stored for years under Leslie's control. On the other was the habit of pitying a mother who always played the victim. She wanted to escape Leslie, yet years of conditioning had trained her to ask if she was being cruel for turning away. Izaiah made Eva begin to believe she could have another life, a life not chained to her mother's shadow. That was why the collapse that followed would be so merciless. Before the truth broke open, Eva had started noticing strange signals on both sides. Leslie was too tense at moments that seemed unrelated. Izaiah sometimes fell silent, as if weighing something larger than what he was saying. A low, persistent unease clung to her, but she didn't want to face it because the final instinct of someone manipulated for too long is always to delay the truth when the truth promises pain. The trap closed in a place Leslie believed was safe, a sealed room luxurious enough that she could still carry the feeling she belonged to the winning side. She walked in with her familiar control, thinking she was about to adjust another link, crush another small risk before it grew. Eva was dragged there in confusion, believing she would witness another one of her mother's settlements, another familiar performance of manipulation. But what waited for her wasn't a script Leslie had written. It was the moment Leslie's script was ripped apart in front of her eyes. Jacob and Smitty were already there, rigid as wires ready to snap. All the months of being misdirected, spun in circles, forced to watch victims sink deeper while they couldn't move had compressed into a rage that nearly choked the room. But it was Izaiah who truly froze the air. He did not stand as an outsider, and he did not stand behind Eva as her gentle refuge anymore. He stepped forward with a coldness that made Eva instantly feel the terrifying distance between the man she thought she knew and the man now standing in front of her. Another layer of him surfaced without needing much explanation. Jacob's look at him, Smitty's lack of surprise, and most of all Leslie's brief, involuntary shift in expression were enough to make clear this was no longer a private romantic drama. This was a hunt ending with the prey realizing she had been surrounded. What made the room fall silent wasn't only Leslie being named outright, it was the evidence being presented in a way she couldn't twist. The ring was lifted like a trivial object, and then it opened into a hidden compartment containing encrypted data, transaction chains, contact schedules linking her to intermediary nodes, and timestamp comparisons that matched perfectly with the ring's movements. It wasn't a single proof, but a hint that locked scattered clues into a closed circle. Leslie could deny each lead when it stood alone. But once everything appeared together, the very perfection she once praised became her indictment. Her fury erupted not purely from fear, but from the humiliation of someone stripped of control for the first time. What hurt Leslie most wasn't the risk of arrest. It was being forced to watch her victory torn from her hands in front of Eva, the one person Leslie had always believed she could use as the final chain to keep power. For a split second, Leslie still tried her oldest move, emotional manipulation. She tried to pull Eva into the middle, tried to frame it all as betrayal against her, tried to make herself the hunted rather than the hunter. But this time, desperation only revealed her more clearly than ever. Without the glossy paint, without the composed calculation, there was only the savage rage of a woman who could not bear being seen. Eva stood rigid, as if all strength had been drained from her body. She wasn't just watching her mother unmask, she was watching her entire past rewrite itself in her mind. Every time she had pitied Leslie, every time she had yielded, every time she had blamed herself had been fuel for Leslie's continued dominance. And then the final blow fell when Eva understood that Izaiah, the man who had made her feel rescued, had also entered her life through a secret. Even if his feelings were real now, he had once come to her for another purpose. That shock didn't allow Eva to stand firmly on either side. She was shoved into the exact place Leslie had always wanted to imprison her, between love, hatred, betrayal, and guilt. When the arrest happened, it wasn't a clean victory. Jacob did not feel the relief he expected. His anger remained intact, because catching Leslie didn't erase the damage already done, didn't restore ruined months, didn't heal people who had been turned into merchandise. Smitty understood too, that this was only the end of a central link, not the end of the fallout. And Izaiah, in the very moment the mission succeeded, faced his deepest personal failure. He had done what needed doing, but Eva's gaze made him understand there were wounds no righteous reason could repair. He was no longer her shelter. He was part of the collapse that broke the world she had trusted. Leslie was handcuffed, but she didn't bow her head. A warped pride still burned in her, turning into a chill sharp. It felt unreal. Even as she was pulled from the room, she carried the smile of someone who hadn't fully surrendered, as if she still held one last secret capable of setting everything on fire again. That was what made the aftershock of the night so frightening. Because even though the final boss of the ring had been exposed, the truth didn't bring peace. It only pushed everyone toward a new front line. Eva had to choose whether she would collapse with her mother, or cut her off completely, even if that meant accepting she had been deceived from both sides. Izaiah had to live with the cost of doing the right thing through a brutal method. Jacob and Smitty had to keep walking through the wreckage of the case, knowing that late-arriving justice always leaves losses that can't be recovered. And Fairmont Crest, a place used to burying secrets beneath velvet carpets and warm golden light, was forced to face a truth more grotesque than any before. Sometimes the most dangerous person isn't the one who screams in madness, but the one who knows how to turn their madness into order, how to turn humiliation into ambition, how to turn pain into a weapon. Leslie did it for so long she nearly succeeded forever. Only when her confidence swelled into arrogance did the trap finally tighten enough to close. Yet even as she was dragged away, those left standing understood the night did not close a chapter in any comforting sense. It only opened another one where the truth had won, but no one remained whole.